As we begin our service, would you please take just a moment to make sure that your cell phone is silenced? Thank you. We gather at this hour as family members and friends to honor, remember, and to celebrate the life and the spirit of Carla Miller. We gather here on this day, her 79th birthday. We gather here in this place, this sanctuary of and for the Spirit, in which Carla spent so many meaningful hours. We gather to reflect on the whole of her life in ways perhaps we have never reflected before when she was physically present with us. On behalf of the family, I'd like to thank you for your presence. Even though the death of a loved one is ultimately something that in the end must be faced and borne individually and alone, still in another sense, there's nothing that can take the place of the loving support of a community of neighbors and friends and acquaintances who take the time to be present to express their love and their care. Also, on behalf of the family, I'd like to invite you to a light luncheon reception that will take place not here, but at the Myers Gardens following the service. The invocation for our service are words that would be very familiar to Carla. This is indeed a beautiful day that the Lord has made. Let us then rejoice in it and be glad, and let us count our many, many blessings. Let us be grateful for the incredible gift of life and for the capacity to see, to feel, to hear, and to understand. Let us be grateful for all those who have graced our lives with their presence and thus been a blessing to us. And let us then be especially grateful for the ties of love that bind us together, giving dignity, meaning, worth, and joy to all our days. Let us be together in a time of prayer and personal reflection. Eternal God, power greater than all and yet present in each, at this service of remembrance for our beloved Carla, we address ourselves to that which is beyond thoughts and words, each in our own way, each with our own beliefs and understandings, directing ourselves to that which is eternal and ongoing, the deep within us, calling to the deep beyond us. We come together this day to honor and remember this precious life that has been part of our own life, a life with whom we have lived and shared our life and who has shared her life with us. We understand again on this occasion that life and death belong together. They are part of a larger process, part of a larger whole. And yet even this death, which in some ways comes as a blessing and a relief, it's still the more difficult portion of that whole. And that especially for those of us who knew her best, loved her most, and were nearest to her, there will be some kind of tear in the fabric of our life to which attention must be paid. Thus we come to this service of passage today, as generations before us have come to similar gatherings at the death of their loved ones. We come to give our thanks for this life, to grieve our loss, and also to sing our praise for life in all its complexities and uncertainties. And finally, we come to this service to confirm those things which she whom we honor today honored with her heart, her mind, her body, soul, and spirit. Amen. We continue our service with the lighting of candles of remembrance for Carla's life by her grandchildren. I'd like the grandchildren to please begin coming forward. Their names are listed in the obituary in your order of service, but let me read those to you. It's Scott Greenlee, Sierra Summer and Sage Moore, Sasha, Cecilia, and Sammy Rouvewa, Oliver and Mare Miller, Lilibet Votzek, Gwyneth Dewsbury, Benjamin Smith, and not present with us today is Darren Dewsbury. Now, the children are going to light these candles of remembrance, the grandchildren, after we together recite the words that are in your order of service. So if you would look in your order of service under the heading Lighting of Candle of Remembrance, and there's one correction that needs to be made to those printed words, namely in the last line where it says, "This chalice," would you please substitute the words "these candles," so that we say we light these candles in grateful remembrance. And so now would you all please join with me in saying in unison, "She goes free of the earth, grown lighter than breath, she is set free in our remembering. She is hidden among all that is and cannot be lost. We light these candles in grateful remembrance." I and my wife Flossie, close friends of Carla for 40 years, last visited her exactly a month ago, July 26. And Carla was still expressing at that time the desire to live 3 or 4 more years. It was obvious to me, to those around us, and perhaps at times to her, that that was not going to happen. But she would not, and perhaps could not, let go. In the last 20-plus years, Carla has had to let go of a lot, as the rare form of cancer robbed her of so much. But still, with all that she had gone through and given up, she was not ready to let go of life and consciousness, and to the astonishment of many of us, clung tenaciously to life. At the same time, she valued a poem by one of her favorite poets, the poet Jane Kenyon, a poem titled "Let Evening Come." And a little over a year ago, May 2018, she said, writing to a friend, "I am slowly moving toward the life ahead for me. I have just read Let Evening Come, a poem that is a metaphor for my process right now, so rich and comforting to me. Poetry and dreams speak to me in a way like nothing else." Here's that poem. Let the light of late afternoon shine through chinks in the barn, moving up the bales as the sun moves down. Let the cricket take up chafing as a woman takes up her needles and her yarn. Let evening come. Let dew collect on the hoe abandoned in long grass. Let the stars appear and the moon disclose her silver horn. Let the fox go back to its sandy den. Let the wind die down. Let the shed go black inside. Let evening come. To the bottle in the ditch, to the scoop in the oats, to air in the lung, let evening come. Let it come as it will, and don't be afraid. God does not leave us comfortless, so let evening come. As this poem stands, it's a magnificent embrace of the dark and the acceptance of the unknown. It's a poem that's often read at memorial services as a kind of surrender to and even the welcoming of death. But for Carla, as in the statement that I read of hers, and as much as she suffered, she was not ready to surrender to death. Rather, she saw this poem with its refrain of "Let evening come" as a metaphor for surrendering to loss and limitation so that she could carry on with their life and see what it still had to offer her in terms of greater consciousness and ongoing connections with both human and natural life. As I understand Carla, it was not really a fear of death that was present, but the impulse to drink life to the lees, L-E-E-S, lees being the sediment, the drugs, the dregs at the bottom of a glass or a cup. There's the great poem Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. I will drink life to the lees. It was a favorite of Carla's great friend Steve Moorhead, who died abruptly in the spring of 2001. A year or so ago, not necessarily for this service, Carla jotted down the names of her favorite poets: Rumi, Rilke, Jane Kenyon, and Mary Oliver, giving the names of two of Mary Oliver's poems, Wild Geese and The Summer Day. Now, I have had the delightful, agonizing task of trying to select just a few poems with all the possibilities for this service, poems that speak both to this occasion and to what it was that sustained Carla. In the end, I decided to look at Carla's life through the lens of three poems of Mary Oliver's, two already mentioned, but then there's a third poem that speaks to Carla's journey of self-discovery. And when I say self here, I'm not thinking self with a small s, but as self with a capital S, as with her teacher. She was a student of Carl Jung, who spoke of that deeper self, that essential self that connects you with essential being. And so it has to do with finding your own voice and connecting to your creative self and to creativity itself. Here's the poem titled The Journey, Mary Oliver. One day, you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, "Mend my life," each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing that you could do, determined to save the only life that you could save. That discovery of your own voice indeed saves you. But as the poem indicates, and as Carla knew and taught, it was not an inwardly turned, selfish, isolating thing. That voice was a connecting thing. You moved deeper and deeper into the world, connecting with fellow humans, with animals, with nature at large, and with larger reality in all its complexity. The poem that was such a favorite of Carla's that gets at that is Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. And then finally, a third poem, of Mary Oliver. And this poem characterizes to me Carla's openness of heart and spirit, her attentiveness of mind. And the poem ends with a question that she asked of herself, and then that she asked of those that she counseled with. And I would suggest now she asks of all of us here gathered today, the summer day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down in the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I spoke of the importance for Carla of finding her voice, a metaphor for discovering one's deeper self. I suggest that Carla still had her voice, even when, as in these latter years, she could speak only with great difficulty and then finally not at all. Nevertheless, she longed to physically speak, to communicate with all the vigor and nuance that she once had. Now, she didn't spend a lot of time thinking about her memorial service. She had only one request for it, namely, that those of us gathered have a chance to once again hear her physical voice before the surgery that cut the cancerous lingual nerve controlling the movement of the tongue took that voice away, a surgery that was necessary to preserve her life. Her request will be honored as her tech-savvy son and son-in-law are making it possible for us to hear Carla read 2 poems, and these were read at a summer service that her second husband, Carl Green, gave in the summer of 1995 called Musings of a Soul. Carl Green, incidentally, is the artist who created that beautiful, striking sculpture across the street at the parking lot, the horizontal figures. It's called Conversation. So it was in that service that Carla did the reading, 2 poems, which Danny Heck will now play.
Good morning, I'm Carla Miller Green. This morning I have 2 selections to share with you. The first is from the work of the poet Khalil Gibran. Much of his work has been very meaningful to me at different points in my life. As I looked over this, I wondered, what should I read today? The work that first brought his poetry to my attention was the piece on children, as I was in a period of my life when I was bearing children and raising children. Then there was the section on sorrow and joy, and I can't tell you how many times the lines sustained me. The deeper sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. I thought some years I'll be very joyful someday. And the sections on the teacher, and of course the beautiful words about marriage that we know. But today I'd like to share with you his thoughts on beauty. It seems that life is cycled again, and I find myself again in a summer part of my life. New things are coming to blossom, beautiful people, relationships, work. The garden is in bloom again. And the poet said, "Speak to us of beauty." And he answered, "Where shall you seek beauty? And how shall you find her, unless she herself be your way and your guide? And how shall you speak of her, except she be the weaver of your speech?" The aggrieved and the injured say, beauty is kind and gentle. Like a young mother half shy of her own glory, she walks among us. And the passionate say, nay, beauty is a thing of might and dread. Like the tempest, she shakes the earth beneath us and the sky above us. The tired and the weary say, beauty is a soft whisperings. She speaks in our spirit. Her voice yields to our silences like a faint light that quivers in the fear of the shadow. But the restless say, "We have heard her shouting among the mountains, and with her cries come the sound of hooves, and the beating of wings and the roaring of lions." At night, the watchmen of the city say, "Beauty shall rise with the dawn from the east." And at noontide, the toilers and the wayfarers say, "We have seen her leaning over the earth from the windows of sunset." In winter, the snowbound say, "She shall come with the spring, leaping upon the hills." And in the summer heat, the reapers say, "We have seen her dancing with the autumn leaves, and we saw a drift of snow in her hair." All these things you have said of beauty, yet in truth, you spoke not of her, but of needs unsatisfied. And beauty is not a need, but an ecstasy. It is not a mouth thirsting, nor an empty hand outstretched, but rather a heart inflamed and a soul enchanted. It is not the image you would see, nor the song you would hear, but rather an image you see though you close your eyes, and a song you hear though you shut your ears. It is not the sap within the furrowed bark, nor a wing attached to a claw, but rather a garden forever in bloom, and a flock of angels forever in flight. My friends, beauty is life when life unveils her holy face. But you are life, and you are the veil. Beauty is eternity gazing at itself in a mirror, but you are eternity. You are the mirror. And these words from the poet Mary Oliver. The poem is entitled Morning Poem. Every morning the world is created under the orange sticks of the sun. The heaped ashes of the night turn into leaves again and fasten themselves to the high branches. And the ponds appear like black cloth on which are painted islands of summer lilies. If it is your nature to be happy, you will swim away along the soft trails for hours, your imagination alighting everywhere. And if it is your spirit that carries within it the thorn that is heavier than lead, if it is all you can do to keep on trudging, there is still somewhere deep within you a beast shouting that the earth is exactly what it wanted. Each pond with its blazing lilies is a prayer heard and answered lavishly every morning. Whether or not you ever dared to be happy, whether or not you ever dared to pray.
We will now honor Carla's life and memory with reminiscences by family members and two friends, and the order of speakers is listed in your order of service. We begin with the children and then follow the two friends, Barb Anderson and Jan Mann. Annie?
I can do this, right? When my mom was 3.5 years old, she caught her clothes on fire from striking a handful of matches. She received third-degree burns over much of her body and was rushed to the hospital, where she spent the next 9 months of her life in a burn unit. In 1944, the main focus in the treatment of burn victims was on the physical. And because a newly implemented technique called skin grafting was being tested at that time here in Grand Rapids, her life was saved. But there was not much consideration for the mental well-being of patients with severe burns at that time. A crying child was not conducive to the already difficult task of treating a fire-ravaged body. So we can imagine what took place to make sure crying did not accompany her painful recovery. As an adult, my mom continued holding in most of her emotions. But as a mother, she did so much that her children could express theirs and feel heard. Every day that I can remember, my mom was waiting in the kitchen when I got home from school. I would hang my coat on one of the hooks, kick off my shoes or boots, and she would ask me all about my day. I can still feel the way my body would become lighter and my mind would begin to relax as I poured out all of the details of my experiences at school. Then at night, also for as long as I can remember, my mom would come upstairs and sit at each of our bedsides, scratching our backs and letting us decompress further with concerns or questions about life. I have no idea how she mustered the energy to do this every night at the very end of each long day, raising 3 children, and for many years, more than 3, as my parents welcomed other family and non-family members who were in need to live with us while I was growing up. At midlife, my mom went back to school and acquired 2 separate master's degrees, one in psychology and the other in social work, so that she could help more than just her children and family and friends to feel heard. As a licensed therapist, she spent the rest of her life creating space so that others could feel the safety she was not given to express their feelings and emotions as a vital part of healing. In my mom's last few years, her demeanor was a bit different than it had been for most of her life, as she literally talked her body into working with and accepting each new ailment or failing. She began practicing expressing her feelings about things, her needs, her wants, her anger, her hopes, her dreams. Having lived almost 75 years keeping most of these to herself, her attempts at letting them out were not always elegant or easy to respond to. But she practiced right to the bitter end in trying to tell us what she needed or felt or wanted to do. Like have us accompany her on a 1.3-mile walk in the blistering heat for up to 2 hours every day for the past several months, right up until the day she closed her eyes for the last time. Her perseverance was, and always will be, an unbelievable inspiration for me. Over the past couple years, I began writing my thoughts about death and what happens what happens to our souls, and realized that I saw a correlation between the life-giving and transformative practices of a therapist and the transcendence of our mind, body, and spirit when we die. When we let ourselves be vulnerable and share our deepest selves with others, if they are truly able to hear us, we live on. We live on through that most daring and sacred exchange. I finally came up with a title for the poem my writing turned into as my mom was slipping away last week. It is simply called To Be Heard. As I crash upon the ground, deep within the forest, bound and determined, I fall with all the might and grace I have to mark this standing place I've shared so long, now leave to greener friends, and wonder if the waves I make will be received as I take one final bow with bud and root and stem and leaf in hand, and reach to touch another's ear, my end so near as I descend to join the waiting forest bed may never come through lowered bough, if with my fall I send into the world vibrations clear, no fear. Though loss of seeded fruits I once could share will soon appear, I branch beyond as I hit ground, laying down the path I clear, sets free the open soul I bear. If someone hears, I hear you, Mom.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. 6 years ago, Paul and I had just moved back to town after an equestrian sabbatical in Florida, and my mom had decided to sell the home that she and Carl had created. We bought a home together, thinking it would be a temporary step, as we were each looking forward to taking time to create the next chapter of our lives. 6 months into the new venture, she was diagnosed with a reoccurrence of her cancer, which changed our trajectory. How fortunate we have been to have spent these years living with and learning from her. On August 5th, I said to her, "Mom, your birthday's coming up. What do you want for your birthday?" She wrote back to me, "To get well, to ride my horse again, to plant bulbs in the spring, or to plant bulbs for the spring." Then a few minutes later, she added, "and a cashmere sweater." This list was shocking to me. She was still planning so far into the future, and I was wondering if she was going to make it until her birthday. But that is a true example of her thinking. The power of her mind to work with her body was astounding. As Paul and I discussed what in the world I would say at the memorial of my amazing mother, we decided that these 4 things were actually representations of parts of her life, and that we'd speak together about them. We hope to provide a little insight into these 4 gifts as they touch on some of the elements that gave my mom her essence.
The gift of getting well. Hi, everybody. I'm Paul. October will mark the 39th year that I've known this family. For those that don't know, I work remotely from home office, and I have a unique perspective about Carla as I saw her every day that we were home together. I do not have enough time to express the awe that Carla inspired in me while she fought to stay healthy. Those of you who knew her best can attest to the superhuman will that she exhibited. We had a little scare in January, and the family raced home to hold vigil at her bedside, only to have her wake up 3 days later complaining that she was hungry and that she was amazed that everybody in the family was there attending to her. We made sure after that to keep her well nourished by making fresh smoothies every day. They were packed with calories. Her joyful hoops would echo through the house whenever it was time to have some smoothie. They say that it takes a village to raise a child, but Carla amassed a community to help shuffle off this mortal coil. During the last 4 months of her life, she rarely missed a day of walking, as Andy mentioned, around the neighborhood. Lori made weekly arrangements to have many of you accompany her on these walks. She referred to these sojourns as the best part of her day. And I would be concerned with those walking on with her on those hot, muggy days. And they would walk, as Andy said, some of the times over 2 hours. And Lori would have to remind me that she really just wanted to extend the best part of her day.
The gift of riding my horse again. Why would she write this? She could hardly walk. Kiwi was her soulmate. They were 2 peas in a pod. Like Carla, he has a deep sensitivity. The fact that she was so physically weak made her the perfect rider for him because she rode with balance and mental focus. She had no strength. Like her, Kiwi had health issues. He was an older horse with arthritis and tendon and ligament issues that required periods of rest and rehabilitation. He had odd swellings in the cartilage of the bones of his face. She had such empathy and would rub the bones as they were her own face. I'm sure she also wanted to return to the barn because she missed her barn family. She would often get dressed to go to the barn before 9 a.m., do chores around the house all day, and finally leave for the barn after 5. It drove Paul crazy. Sometimes it would be about 10 p.m., and I would text Sue, the owner of the farm, and she would tell me that my mom was still in the barn, brushing Kiwi and talking with the night chore person. I would like to thank Sue Bardens and her husband, Bill, for the wonderful years that my mom spent at their Equalose farm. Often, when Paul and I were unable to help her with a task at home, she would say, "I'll ask Bill. He loves to help me. And then I can bake him a blueberry pie." Even though she hadn't eaten for years, she still loved to cook and bake for people.
The gift of planting bulbs for the spring. After they were married, Carla and Carl Green lived in a house next to the Miller family home in Cascade off of Thornapple River Drive. It's now called Artisan Woods. She and Carl built a compound there that exploded with plants and flowers. When we moved into the Cannonsburg house together, she longed to have a space of her own where she could display her love of gardening. With the help of her friend, Debbie Clements, they created a beautiful meditation garden that they both cherished and worked very hard to refine over the few years. She punctuated the garden with several bird feeders and cursed every raccoon, squirrel, and chipmunk that tried to enjoy a meal there. Carla would make yearly trips to the local greenhouses to create beautiful flower displays in large pots around our pool and tend to them religiously. This past spring, Lori had to make time to do that design, and working with our daughters made those big pots sing again in Carla's honor, which made her so happy. We took turns making sure to water all the plants, which Carla used to do routinely. Carla would often go into the garden at the end of the day, prop up her feet on the table, and would doze off among her flowers, plants, and feeders. Some days we would forget she was out there, and we would rush into the garden apologizing, and she would write, "I loved it." One day a few weeks ago, a rainstorm popped up while she was lounging in the garden, and she sat in it for 45 minutes before we realized she was outside. And charging out there in a panic to help her, Sierra found her smiling and soaking wet. She covered her in towels, but Carla was grinning ear to ear. If I ever expressed concern about her getting caught in the rain, she would write on her tablet, "I am not made of sugar." Underlined twice, 3 exclamation points. She was a very sweet lady, and I've caught myself wondering this past week if I did enough. Sorry. Although there were tough days living with my wife's mother, I will miss her kookiness, her bravery, and her love.
The gift of a cashmere sweater. I'm sure everyone here has visions of my mom in a colorful scarf with her white hair and gorgeous smile. She loved color and beauty. She expressed her inner beauty by presenting herself to the world every day with intention. In the last few months, her caregivers, Dolores, Emma, Grace, and Sarah, would often comment about the particularness with which she would select clothes for the walk. Miniskirt, tank top, and matching socks. It would often take 20 minutes to pick out the right pair of socks to match the skirt and shirt. My mother was a fabulous teacher, wonderful role model, and fiercely independent woman. These last few months, I have been ending my days early to come home and sit with her to assess how she was feeling and the highs and lows of her days. We would discuss what went right and what could improve the next day. Slowing down my life to help her in her final days has given me time to be reflective. As I continue my life without her, physical presence. I will tend to my mental wellness and physical wellness. I will ride my horse and continue to share that passion with my students. I will plant bulbs for the spring and grow her gardens to keep natural beauty around me. And I will always be sure to have a cashmere sweater in my closet to wrap myself in when I miss her.
Last time I was up here, everything looked bigger. And they were sore afraid. I feel a certain sense of privilege as my mom's youngest child and only son. Today we reflect on the life of a person who had so many deep and meaningful relationships, the kind of person with whom you cannot possibly get enough time, whose lifespan would always seem too short. And I realize that I'm amongst the few that got plenty of time with her, sharing, starting from day one. Anne reminded us of the ways my mom cherished her children, and I'm sure before the day is out, we'll hear much about my mom's ability to understand the experiences and perspectives of others, especially those who are troubled or suffering. I wanted to recognize another part of her personality that probably was not as widely known. You would think that someone who has deep, vulnerable relationships with friends and therapy clients, whose life's work was to investigate and heal the heaviest of life's burdens, would have an unwavering regard for social norms, formality, rock-solid best practices for respectful communication. Now, she had these skills, but it turns out they were highly dependent on context. In the right situation, all bets were off. Frequently, often at the dinner table, my mom's willingness to break the rules of polite conversation would result in deep, tears-flowing gut laughter for almost everybody. There would be raised eyebrows from visitors. Her sense of empathy and kindness and concern for others actually never wavered. Beyond that, anything was game, as long as no one got hurt. I've never been with a group of people who laughed as hard or as often as my family. We laughed at my grandmother's warning when I was a hyperactive 6-year-old. If you don't get control of that child now, you never will. As a middle schooler just outside these doors, we laughed about the Christian protester who yelled kind of a similar warning, actually, about me. This kid's gonna grow up to play rock and roll and smoke pot. Although I preferred jazz, I got started on the rock and roll right away. I never really took to pot, although I recently enjoyed some edibles with a certain group of 70-year-olds on a trip with my mom to Port Townsend. But it's legal there. We laughed for years about the yoga class my mom and uncle attended, where some poor devotee apparently suffered from uncontrollable flatulence. One time after dinner, my mom revealed that the odd-looking casserole was odd-looking because our cat had eaten the top layer of cheese while it was cooling. That recipe became known as cat spit chicken. As a teenager, we laughed at stories from my Uncle Jer's dating life. If you dated my uncle in the 80s, don't worry, it wasn't about you. The degree of vulnerability or tragedy of a situation often mirrored how hard we laughed at it. So you can imagine how funny the end of her life was. Our family group texts are full of photos of her mugging for the camera with her latest bandage, or more often with the wound before the bandage was put on. During the last few weeks of her life, she started to forget words and forget names for common things. She knew this and would ask what things are called. We think this is what she meant to do when, after what would be her last trip to the bathroom, her last bowel movement, she turned around, looked down, and said to the two people helping her stand, "What should we call it?" I don't think anyone answered, so I'll answer now. We should call it grace. We should call it love. We should call it a fierce, cackling resistance to the inevitable. Even in the midst of her terrible illness, we laughed at the humanity and from within the humanity that my mom, as always, dared invite us into.
Wow. Amazing woman. First time I met Carla, I was in the aisleway of Timberlane Farm. I have no idea what I was doing or what horse I had at the time. There's been so many. But in walks this beautiful woman with an air of confidence and gorgeous white hair, I might add, and says, "Hello, I'm Carla, and you are?" Thus began a conversation that day and many other days to come. She had an uncanny ability to look at you and really see you while she patiently listened. She paid attention. She would stay fully present in the moment while listening to me rattle on about something. Carla was one of those rare people that actually waited for you to finish what you were saying before she would comment. That is a true gift. She would tell me that I knew more than I thought I did, that if I followed that knowledge, I would do the right thing. I loved her for that. The Carla I knew was gifted in so many ways. She loved nature, and she was a creative gardener. Lori commented to me not so long ago that Carla looked out at her garden and said, "I need yellow out there." She loved dogs, especially Prince, but Carla was also one of us. By that I mean she was a true equestrian, true horsewoman. There are many characteristics of a great rider, and I'm sure you could find more than I have. But I believe there are at least 7 that Carla embodied. Yes, 7. I have already mentioned confidence, patience, creativity. The other four are determination, persistence, passion, and courage. She had a knowledge about and passion for horses. You could see it in her interactions with Kiwi. She was the boss, and Kiwi knew it. You knew she loved horses through her determination and persistence to ride, even while her body was failing her. I'm sure many of us have Carla stories about her riding Kiwi out in the fields or watching her ride in a clinic with Jackie Brooks in the indoor arena. This one time when Carla decided she was going to ride Kiwi, she was beginning to need a little help getting on, but on she was. However, as she starts walking down the long side of the arena, she suddenly begins to list off to the left. Or was it to the right? No, if it was Carla, it had to be to the left. Anyway, she stayed on through sheer determination. She rode Kiwi. The last time I saw Carla, she was waiting for me at the top of the driveway at her home to go for a walk. As I pulled up, I saw her elegantly sitting on her walker with her cane, legs crossed, hat on, vest on. Those walking shoes that looked way too big for her feet were on, and she was writing something on her writing pad. As we took off on our walk, it was clear she would be dictating the direction and length of the walk. The sun was out, it was a beautiful day, and as we walked, the hotter we got. So off came the vest, and I think the hat. She would occasionally stop and we would talk. Carla on the writing pad, me reading and responding. It took exactly an hour, not two, 1 hour, to make it around the neighborhood. When we got back, I helped her get the walker and her cane into the house. I parked the walker where she directed me to, and before I realized that she had tossed the cane down the stairs toward her room, beckoning me to go down with her. So of course I did. We chatted for a few more minutes and then I left. Courage is defined as the ability to deal with something dangerous, difficult, or unpleasant. Having strength in the face of pain, Carla had courage in abundance. In John O'Donohue's book of Celtic wisdom, Anam Cara, which means soul friend, he talks about how you could share your innermost self, your mind, and your heart with your Anam Cara. I think Carla was that for many of her friends over the years. I know she was for me. In the Celtic tradition, the eternal world was close to the natural world. I want to leave you with a Celtic prayer that links up the whole world of nature and the seasons with the presence of the eternal life. For Carla. I am going home with thee, to thy home, to thy home. I'm going home with thee, to thy home of winter. I am going home with thee, to thy home, to thy home. I'm going home with thee, to thy home of autumn, of spring, and of summer. I am going home with thee, thy child of my love, to thy eternal bed, to thy perpetual sleep. Peace be with you all.
Carla Miller was a force of nature. She was a mighty woman, strong mind, strong body, strong will. Funny, in some ways, that she dedicated so much of her life to healing the wounds of women in small groups, in her therapy, in workshops, in every aspect of countless informal conversations with family and friends. Many strong women are not drawn to healing other women, preferring to distance themselves from the weak and the damaged or the injured. They hide their feminine nurturant spirit under a bushel basket, lest they too seem weak. But not Carla. Carla was a heat-seeking missile when it came to finding the true source of a wound. She could smell a lie from across the room, and she would worry it like a dog with a bone until she found out the truth. Long before she lost her ability to speak, she could use silence like a magician. And the sounds of sympathy and understanding that she could produce from deep in her throat brought many of us to tears. Worse, she would sometimes issue a guttural, deep sound of disapproval as well, also bringing some of us to tears. She was fearless in her defense of the feminine. In group meeting after meeting, she would exhort us to find a place of centered stillness and break apart the rigid mask that you had made for yourself. She unleashed the power of the circle and drew us together for decades to find our voices. She worked harder and longer than any of us to bring meaning to the gatherings for women. For decades, Carla never stopped reading, writing, planning, and bringing meaning to the gatherings for women. She urged us to reach into our own depths and break free, break into the spirit, into the world, as Mary Oliver says, to save the only life you could save. It took work to hear one's inner voice, to find wholeness, and Carla gave us a path. I share a few of those with you here today. Build a sacred space of your own, no matter how small. Listen to the water. Sit in silence. Light a candle. Walk in the out of doors. Meditate. Listen to and create art. Honor your dreams. Discover what brings you peace. Embrace both the masculine and the feminine. Build an altar of the images that capture your spirit and your dreams. She helped us practice these things and to share our journey. And we often developed new and timid voices in a safe circle of women until we were strong enough to carry those voices into the world. And at last, we became more truly connected with ourselves, with our family, with our friends, and with the great interconnected web of things to which she urged us to join our own soul. Carla was so much a creature of the earth that she delighted in having dirt on her hands, from gardening in her sanctuary garden, from riding her horse, from training one of her many dogs, and just from wandering around the paths of her many homes. I think maybe she thought at the end of her life that if she could just keep moving on those daily walks, maybe she could stay one step ahead of death. So by sheer force of will, she walked each day in the summer heat, the rain, the wind, and she would not stop lest she lost her place among the living. I'm reminded of Emily Dickinson's poem, "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me." The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. I imagine Carla at long last opening that carriage door and with lifted head nodding to acknowledge death's courtesy and stepping lightly inside, where in her wise way she surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. And I believe she was carrying all of us in her heart, because she once said to me, "I will hold you in my heart. There is infinite space there for those I invite in." I learned from Carla to always surround myself in my inner work, whether in solitude or in groups, with beauty. Carla would place flowers, stones, feathers, silk, nature's finest offerings in the center of our circles, and always candles, so that when you spoke, and use your voice. You would light a candle afterwards. In this way, she created circles within circles. And at every time, that ritual was lit by the warm glow of these singular flames. Following her ritual, I will light candles in a circle on the chancel. Those are in honor of all the circles of love and connection that Carla had in her life. I want to conclude by reading a poem that Carla wrote in 2017, and it seems to me as if it's directed to us today. May you hear her voice in these words. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, is upon me. Minimal light and maximum darkness. I can feel it in my bones. The urge to sleep, to huddle by the fire, to warm myself in the embers, still glowing, still radiating, still alive. Warm coals of the precious hearts of my friends. Friendships have both burned me and warmed me. Embers of so many dear hearts, individuating and transforming. I now witness all with compassion. I breathe on their dear living embers, feeding all within that shines, encouraging new growth. For the life of their spirits and of mine, I light my candle. Blessed be.
Over the years, Carla was a great supporter of the Grand Rapids Women's Chorus, and to honor her and express gratitude to her, a number of them were able to make it here today. I thank you for that. They will sing the Scottish folk song, The Parting Glass. A prayer of gratitude for Carla's life. Let us to be together in prayer. Eternally creative Spirit of life and love, we are grateful for all the things in our life that are good, true, and beautiful. Grateful for the qualities of spirit that inform, strengthen, encourage, inspire, and give us faith and hope. We are grateful this day for the life and spirit of Carla Miller. Grateful to have had the presence of such a soul and such a spirit in our lives. We are grateful for the many days of her life, for all that was given her to do. We're grateful for the qualities of her character and personality, her varied interests, inquiring mind, tenacious spirit, depth of soul, compassionate heart, her deep devotion to and unwavering support of immediate and extended family and of all those in her sphere who needed a mother, her care for community, her love of animals and nature, her embrace of life. We are also grateful for all those who were part of her life and for whom she was grateful. Grateful for all those in her life's journey who in any way opened her mind, deepened her affections, and confirmed and strengthened her faith, her hope, and her love. We are grateful, especially in these more recent years, for all who reached out to her in time of need. And now we will remember with affection the qualities of her life and spirit as we were given to understand them. We pray that we will have the heart and mind to treasure these our remembrances so that they may go on contributing to our growth in wisdom, understanding, and in loving kindness. Amen. Near the beginning of the service, the grandchildren lit candles of remembrance. We conclude with a call and response ritual suggested by the family in which we all lift up our ongoing spiritual connection with Carla. I'm going to read a sentence to which you are invited to respond with the 4 words, "We will remember you. We will remember you." In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of the summer, in the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, in the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, in the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, in the rising of the sun and in its going down, in the beginning of the year and when it ends, when we are weary and in need of strength, when we are lost and sick at heart, when we have joys and we yearn to share them. So long as we live, you too shall live, for you are now a part of us. Our closing words of benediction are from the Reverend Kendall Gibbons, and to me, these words characterize the way Carla lived her life. There is, finally, only one thing required of us, and that is to take life whole, the sunlight and shadows together, to live the life that is given us with courage and humor and truth. We have such a little moment out of the vastness of time for all our wondering and loving. Therefore, let there be no half-heartedness. Rather, let the soul be ardent in its pain, in its yearning, and in its praise. Then shall peace enfold our days, and glory shall not fade from our lives.